Hello, I'm Dr. John Harding. I'd like to welcome you to our program, Raising Teens with God. The topic of our program is drugs in a teen's life. And our guest this evening is Paul Bellows. Paul, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Paul is chairman of the board of HMA Behavioral Health and a counselor for teens and young people and adults with substance abuse problems for over 20 years. And those aren't his best credentials. His best are that he has a good wife and 4 kids and 9 grandchildren, and is a personal friend and colleague. And we have an awful lot to cover tonight in a half an hour, and I think this is the third program in our teen series. We did God in a Teen's Life, and we did the psychology of adolescence, and now we're doing drugs in a teen's life, and we hope to do sexuality in a teen's life, and school in their life, and career choice before the 6-program series is done. I see drugs, having practiced pediatrics for a long time and having seen a lot of teens, 4 of our own, go through adolescence. I just see drugs as a mine, and I see the infants and the toddlers and the children still doing very well in our society, even though our society has changed so much and has placed so many dangers now in a child's life. But most of them seem to do well, but then they come into even early adolescence now, which I consider about age 9 to 12. And then the mid-adolescent, the true teen, the 13 to 16, and then the late adolescent from 16 and beyond to 30, 35, 40, whenever adolescence ends.
Right.
But I see that early adolescent, that 9 to 12-year-old, as still mostly a child, but certainly moving into adolescence and moving towards becoming a teen. And they have to negotiate a minefield to get safely into young adulthood. And there are a number of mines that can blow them out of the water, and one of them is drugs. And the other, of course, is sexuality with teen pregnancies and AIDS, and their risk-taking behaviors that they can kill themselves in an auto accident that can be drug-related, alcohol, marijuana, or both, or other drugs. And I think for sure in the Army, no recruit is sent out into the field and expected to know how to negotiate a minefield without some training. And I think the same with our children. I think we've got to train them to be educated, to be aware of drugs, and I think as they get into early adolescence, even increase the training more seriously. And I think I wanted to just start with the definition of drug abuse, because I think there are lots of definitions, but drug abuse, I think, is any use of drugs that causes physical, psychological, economic, legal, or social harm to the user or others affected by the user's behavior. And just with that definition in mind, and then just to mention that we're going to talk about the last 40 years, because America and our kids and things were quite stable, but in the last 40 years there was that explosion of drug use in the 60s and 70s. Then there was a decrease in the 80s, and now it seems to be coming back again. Marijuana use has doubled with our teens in the past 2 years. And I think the first question I'd really like to ask you to answer, to comment on, is why do they start? Why do our adolescents, our teens, start drugs?
John, there are many reasons why adolescents start to use mind-altering substances, and probably one of the biggest ones is curiosity. Peer pressure. Some of the friends are trying it out. Another one would be low self-esteem, if they don't feel well about themselves. And we all know that it's a delicate age. They're going through many, many things at that particular frame of time in their early adolescence and puberty. And so they do express low self-esteem of themselves, although they don't express it usually to the parent. Unless they have a very close relationship with mom or dad, and usually it's with mom. The other one would be, besides curiosity, is it's the thing to do. Everyone else is doing it. It's put in their face. A lot of parents don't realize that when your child goes to school, that they are exposed to marijuana, to alcohol, not so much to cocaine or the other hard drugs, but marijuana and alcohol, they are definitely exposed to it. Dr. Harding was so nice to say, I have 9 grandchildren, and I sort of went, ooh. That's a lot of grandkids. But I do have one that's 13 years old who can tell me anything that I would like to know about cocaine, alcohol, or marijuana, and not from a textbook. Not from a textbook. And she's a girl, 13 years old. And I just sit there and I marvel. And I thank God that He's watching out for her and that she hasn't found it necessary to use. But there are many, many reasons, John.
Well, you know, I think you mentioned thanking God, and that's the title of our program. And I think, you know, why do they start? Sure, they want to be cool. They want to be like all the other kids in their class or in their peer group. And I think that's a problem to them in many ways, is do they clearly know what's cool, and do they clearly know what isn't? And to me, I think cool starts with God, you know, that the teen has a place for God in their life, and is aware that God sees everything they do, and that some things they do please God and some things offend God. And I think to hopefully have some faith in the power of prayer, and I think that to remember the commandments that about 3,000 years ago in the book of Exodus that God gave Moses, and one of them is honor your mother and your father. And for sure, it doesn't honor their mother and their father if they're into drugs and abusing the body that God gave them. And I think that's another place for God, just if the teens can be aware that their body is a gift, and it's a gift from God, and that, yes, honor your mother and your father, and I think we all think of our mother and father on earth, but there's a mother and father up there, and we're supposed to honor them too, and honor the gift that's given to us. And I think that definition of cool, if they can just, you know, kind of see that, you know, it's just absolutely opposite of cool to use drugs, and it offends God, and it dishonors their mother and their father, and it's kind of moving the wrong direction. But they want to be cool, they want to be accepted by their peers, and I think a good friendship is very important at that point too, if they can both agree that we're not going to use drugs, we're not going to put garbage into our brains, and support each other in that.
I agree.
I think another question I had, you know, how can parents suspect drug use? You know, if you know, their teen has started beginning to experiment with drugs, or has tried it out of curiosity, and how can they suspect? I think parents are not as maybe aware when they have teenagers of the signs. Maybe they didn't have personal experience. We're certainly inclined to deny, you know, our children, no way. Everybody else is not ours.
Right.
How could we get parents to, I guess, look harder, have their antennae up higher, be more suspicious without driving the kids crazy by frisking them as they come in?
Well, that's the key, is not to over interrogate. You know, kids just don't like to be interrogated, and I think as parents we all know that. Alcohol is pretty easily detected simply by the odor. However, if you as a parent, you're drinking, you're not going to smell their alcohol. It's also very evident that if you're drinking, he may be thinking it's okay, or she may be thinking it's okay to have a drink. And so I agree with you, John, that, you know, the mother and father, they have to have a very close dialogue with the child, and make them realize that as they're entering into this phase of their life of maturity, that alcohol or other drugs are not to be taken lightly, that there is a serious consequence to picking up your first drink or your drug or whatever the case, and there is something that has to be paid for that, and it's going to come out of your spirituality, your life. Marijuana is, I feel, easily detected. Blurry-eyed, red-eyed, increase in appetite, sleepless nights. Everything is just cool. Everything is okay. Nothing bothers me. And we all know adolescents, they live on emotions. Minute by minute, it's an emotion. But the one who is abusing marijuana, and please note that I said abusing, okay? And I consider that using, is abusing
Well, I'm
when
with you like
take,
100%, zero
yeah,
tolerance for
there's
marijuana.
there's no tolerance whatsoever for that. Because what happens is with the marijuana, it's sort of laid back, and the child does not even realize that they're hooked. They have no clue. And all they know is they feel good. And so as mom and dad, you have to just be, you have to look at a few things. One, is my child introverted? And all of a sudden there's a change in personality. Two, was he sort of a shy kid? And now all of a sudden, you know, he's the life of the party. He's the jokester at home. Three, kids get in trouble with who they're supposed to get in trouble with at particular ages. And they're going to get in trouble with their moms or dads, or they're going to get in trouble with their siblings. That's or at school. That's where they're going to decrease in studies. They see the grades falling down. There has to be a reason why. The hobbies. He or she was a great skier. Now all of a sudden they don't want to ski anymore. They would much rather go over to Benny's house. And you start to see this go along, and that's probably the biggest cue that you'll ever see for use of drugs or alcohol.
You know, I think it's very important for parents to just have an awareness and have an eye open for all of those things you mentioned. And I think if they do get suspicious, they may not be able to be certain because, I think, of denial and because of their ignorance. And I think they have to seek some help from some experts, you know, to run the story by an expert, get some reading material. And, you know, there are a number of telephone numbers that can be called. There are a number of agencies in any city, and there are some national agencies with telephone numbers. And I would encourage parents, I think, if they even have a question or a concern or a suspicion, to run it by somebody, not to kind of deny it and to pull back and wait a year or two till they're really sure. And I think at this time, you and I have gone over a list of referral agencies and telephone numbers could be called. And maybe we can just show that graphic now, and people can maybe look through it and take down the number, and we'll repeat it at the end of the program too. We'll hold it on for about a minute.
Yeah. I find that most of these agencies, John, are there for, you know, the goodness of all of us. Let's take Alcoholics Anonymous as one of them. AA, most adults tend to think of AA as the person who has the problem, and he has or she has a big trench coat on with a wine bottle underneath. And it's simply not true. That actually the members of AA that are derelicts represent about 1% of a million people that belong to it. There's probably about a 13% membership now of people from the ages of 12 through 21. Worcester, in Worcester County, has one of the largest populations of young people in AA who have been able to lead productive lives. Because when that abuse goes over, when we have different stages of you know, the early stage of addiction to the middle stage of addiction to chronicity, the chronic part of the addiction, there's no more education in the sense of how to prevent, as we so talked about. You know, it's now we've got to rehabilitate. And I think it's important with your program on prevention, to educate before this happens, to talk to them about the good Lord. I used to teach Christian doctrine. I used to tell them